How about now? Can anyone hear me? How about now? Can anyone hear me? How about now? Can anyone hear me? Okay, is it better now? Okay, I'm assuming you guys can only see the presentation, right? Okay. Okay, that is great. Yeah, I was just having technical difficulties in setting up this live. It's the first time I'm doing this, so hopefully it does get better. But it seems like most of the things are set up. I just need to do a few things on my side. Who's writing the exam in the next week or two or in the next month? Let's see what this does. Okay, I think so. When I do the presentation, I think it actually okay. When I switch to presentation, you guys probably won't be able to see me. So yeah, but I am going to start, and hopefully this session will be of value to everyone who's actually watching. So yeah, I'm just going to switch back to my presentation. Okay, let's see, window, presentation, share. Okay, cool. Just going to make sure that I can see this. Okay, great. So welcome to the Power BI exam prep session. So this is a session for those that would like to write their Power BI exam. So if you're going to be writing the Power BI exam in the next, let's say 2-3 weeks or even a month, I think it doesn't really matter. I think it's literally for anyone who's preparing for the exam. So the way that we're going to do this actually is that today we're going to start with just going through the recap of the actual exam itself and some of the contents that you need to be familiar with as you actually prepare for the exam. And then we're going to dive deeper into the exams. So the way that I'm going to be doing it is that we will actually be going through exam questions, right? So as we go through exam questions, I would be taking questions in between, but the format is basically going to be me taking you guys through some of the exams, right? So we'll continue from today and then we'll start again tomorrow around the same time. Right. Cool. Okay, let's see if my presentation is still working. Cool, just an introduction. I think if you've attended my classes before, I think you've seen this presentation quite a lot. Just by introduction, my name is Clarence. Some people call me Vusi. Yeah, so it really doesn't matter to me what name people actually use. So from an education perspective, I went to Wits University, where basically I started a BCom in information systems and started working in corporate, I think around 2023 or something, right? And I worked at one of the big four audit and advisory firms where I worked on data analytics projects, data migrations, and all those different things. So that was basically my experience. And did a couple of certifications, so you guys can see that I actually do have the Power BI certification. I think that's a good thing. Yeah, because you guys can trust that you're actually getting this advice from someone who's actually done the certification before, right? In terms of the, what is this thing? So the last part is just to highlight the academy. So Whittle Academy is actually sponsoring this. So yeah, it's sponsored by Whittle Academy. So I actually founded Whittle Academy this year. We focus on teaching people data and AI skills. I think that's really the core focus of Whittle Academy. Yeah, so that's just an introduction for me. I think some of you are already students of Whittle Academy. So yeah, it's good to see some familiar faces. Okay, cool. Okay, hopefully that everyone can still hear me and everyone can actually still see. Okay, great. Now, in terms of the content and how we are going to structure this program, so if you think about the exam itself, the exam basically covers four different components. Right? These are the most important components that you sort of need to familiarize yourself with, right? So firstly, you've got prepared data. So this accounts for about 25 to 30% of the actual exam itself. And there is the model data, which is about 25 to 30% of the exam. Then you've got visualize and analyze data. So this one is basically about the same marks, 25 to 30%. And the last one is the manage and secure Power BI assets, right? I think this one is just more around how do you configure certain things, you know, the automation and all of that. So that's basically what that part sort of focuses on. So I'll just be checking if, okay, see there's, okay, so if you guys have questions while I'm going through the exam, just please let me know. So in terms of the structure, that's how we are going to be sort of structuring the content here. Okay, so now I would like to start with the exam overview. Great, cool. So what does the PL-300 actually test, right? And I think this is something that's very important as you're preparing for the exam. You need to really understand what the exam will be testing and what is important as you prepare for the exam, right? So the PL exam measures your ability to prepare data. So when they say prepare data, they're talking about your ability to clean data and stuff like that, transform data. So that is the preparation part of the data, right? The second part is the model data, right? So model data is more about how do you build relationships between tables. So that's when the relations between tables actually come into play and how you actually build them. And then they also measure you on visualize and analyze data, right? Very important. So they actually measure you based on all of those different things. And the last one is deploy and manage assets. So they measure your ability to then publish Power BI dashboards and be able to sort of like make it available to as many people so that more people can actually get access to these assets, right? Then honestly, the focus of the exam is the practical, real world Power BI skills. I think that's how they've sort of modeled the exam itself. And I think if you are genuinely preparing for the exam, I would highly recommend that you just have Power BI open next to you. And, just as you're learning different concepts, just make sure that you're also practicing those other sort of different concepts, right? Cool. Hopefully everyone can still hear me, but I know you guys will let me know if you cannot hear me, right? Cool. Now let's go into the detail. What skills are actually measured, right? What skills are measured in this exam? I think that's also something that's very important to understand, to say, as you prepare for the exam, what skills do they actually measure? So I think the first thing is that, as I've already highlighted this, on prepared data, this is really about how you clean data, how you model data and all of that, right? Prepared data talks about connecting to data sources, right? You need to know the different data sources available, and you need to be explain some of the data sources and their names and all of that. Transform data using Power Query, and you need to be able to handle missing or inconsistent data, profile data, choose between import and also direct query. So this one is a very important one, right? You need to understand when is it valuable to use import and when is it actually available for you to use direct query. So that's the other part that's very important. And then the last part is creating parameters. I think this one is more about, making your reports very dynamic. It could be using text formulas and, not just, so you could be connecting your data to certain data sources without actively, let's say, loading your data, right? So that's what the creating parameters actually refers to. So this part is really about cleaning and transforming data. That is the core thing. Then the second thing that they measure your skill sets towards is basically your ability to model data. So they look at creating relationships, right? Do you understand the creation of relationships? Do you understand star schema design? Do you understand calculated columns versus measures? Do you understand DEX fundamentals? I think a lot of people generally struggle with DEX fundamentals, and I think it's another area that's also very important as you actually prepare for this exam, right? Then the other part is raw context or filter context. I think this one is more about at what level are your DEX formulas actually working at. I think that's another very important area. So they will be testing you across all of these different things, right? And then the other one is using calculate all except. This is still a DEX formula. So you'd see that DEX formulas actually are covered quite a lot and all of that. Yeah. Do you need to have Power BI open for this study session, or we just need to watch and take notes? You don't necessarily have to, you don't need Power BI open. I think, yeah, you should be fine by just taking notes, because we will be going through the exam questions and I will be demonstrating, so do not worry about that. Cool. Then the next part, okay, I'm not sure why. Now let's go into the detail. Okay, I think there was just some background noise. Okay, so now the next part that is important is the visualize and deploy and maintain assets, right? So this one is about 20 to 35%. So the skill set that they actually test you on here is your ability to choose the correct visuals, creating dashboards, using slicers, filters, drill throughs, drill downs, bookmarks, conditional formatting. So if you see anything that I'm listing out here that maybe you feel like you're not comfortable with, or you feel like you need to revisit, that's an immediate indicator that actually there's a topic or concept that you actually need to revisit. So that would be great indicators for you to understand what could potentially be missing. Now, this section basically is testing your business insights and storytelling. It's really about building visualizations, right? But you need to understand the different features that are actually available for you to actually use. So that's a very important one. And then the other part is deploy and maintain assets. I think this one is relatively easy. I wouldn't say it's difficult, but it's just that if you're not too familiar with publishing dashboards and all of that, it might become a tricky one. So it's more about how do you publish dashboards to the Power BI service, and how do you create workspaces on Microsoft Fabrics and all of that. I think now they're using Microsoft Fabrics quite a lot. I'm not sure if they've updated it in the content itself. Applications, row level security, data refreshes. So this is where you do most of the automation on Power BI. Most of the automation on Power BI actually happens on the deploy and maintain asset side of things, right? So that's basically the first part, right? So I know there is a lag in the recording. I think mine might be ahead and yours might be slightly behind. But I'm just going to check if there's any questions so far before I proceed with the actual exam. Okay, I'm guessing there is no questions. Yeah, I think then I will then proceed. Okay, cool. So no questions. Okay, that's great. So this is how we're going to do it, as I've explained. So we will go through the questions, right? So I have a list of questions that we are going to be using to basically practice. So you guys will see that there's a couple of questions. And the approach that I've actually taken is that we get a question, right? We read it. The question's going to be section focused. So I tried to restrict them to the first two sections. So today I tried to restrict them to the first two sections. So it's going to focus mostly on data modeling and also data cleaning. So those would be sort of like the core focusing areas. So that's what we're going to do. And we're probably going to end off with DEX formulas, or I'll take you guys through some of the basics in DEX formulas. I think that's if we get enough time. We go through the basics on DEX formulas, and then we can see what more we can actually do, right? So that's how I've basically structured it. So what I also did, you will see that next to the question, I can tell this is more about storage modes. And if you go to the next one, it talks about get data. So it gives you some insights on what area we are actually focusing on. Okay, great. So we are going to start with the first question, right? I think it's very important that you pay attention to the questions and how basically they are answered, right? So this is the first question that we have. So this is actually also going to give you a clue on how they ask the question. So I actually got this from Certify IQ. So Certify IQ actually has got these exam questions. So most of the questions over here that I'm presenting are based on Certify IQ questions, but I just added a bit of notes just so that we can break down certain concepts and help you understand certain areas, right? So that's how we're going to be structuring it, right? So the first question that we're going to start with is more focused on the storage modes, right? Very important. So the storage modes, what they basically speak about is these two areas, right? So just to refresh your memory, when we speak about storage modes, we're basically speaking about import, we're speaking about direct query, and we're speaking about the dual mode, right? So if we speak about before we go to the question, I just want to highlight this area so that maybe it helps you in terms of understanding how to answer the question, right? So this specific question wants us to select the best storage mode based on the case that we've been given, right? And just to refresh your memory, the import mode basically means that your data is fully loaded onto Power BI, right? This is when you import Okay, I'm so sorry guys, but I am actually back now. Hopefully, okay, okay, we are back. Okay, yeah, it was, the network went out and I now had issues with logging in back. Sorry about that. So I think I'm just going to restart this whole thing. So we're going to start from question one, right? So I think the first question that we started with, it was basically a question around data storage, right? So maybe let's rather read through the question and then go back to some of the notes that I basically have created to help you guys understand the question. The screen is blank. Please live stream. Okay. Then I think I'll have to start. I'm just checking quickly. Okay, so I'm just going to start the whole thing from scratch then. Sorry about that. Yeah. So I think where we ended off was basically looking at the exam overview in terms of what's actually asked as you actually prepare or write the X. Okay, it sounds like I'm having serious issues today. Okay, that's great. Okay, cool. Okay, that's great. Okay, so we're going to start with the first question. I'm sorry, guys, this recording is probably going to be a mess, but yeah, we'll figure out how to resolve this. So the first question really focuses on the storage side of things, right? So if maybe let's read the question firstly, right? So the question basically says, you plan to create a Power BI model shown in exhibit. So this is basically would be the exhibit that you would basically have to go through, right? So as you can see that we've got an entity relationship diagram here. So we've got the sales data, which has got the customer key and it's got the due date. So probably the customer that did the transaction. And then we've got the date key here. So I'm guessing that the date would be linked to whatever transaction because we've got the date key over here. So there is a relationship between that. Then we've got the customer key that is actually linked to the sales table. Then we've got the sales aggregate that's also linked to the due date key and the customer key. So that's just the background of the question, right? Cool. Now, if we go to the actual question itself, it says the data has the following, right? It refreshed, the data has the following requirements. So they start by explaining the requirements for the data itself. So firstly, you've got customer data that must be refreshed daily. So that's the first question. Secondly, you've got a date. The date must be refreshed once every 3 years. So that's the only time at which you actually refresh the date. The other one is the cells must be refreshed in near real time. So very important. The other one, the cells aggregate must be refreshed once a week. So that's sort of like the background and understanding that you need for this sort of question. Then the last thing is saying you need to select the storage modes for the tables and the solution must meet the following requirements. So firstly, minimize the load time. So you want to minimize the time it actually takes for you to load the data. And secondly, you want to ensure that the data is loaded to the model based on the refresh requirements. Which storage mode should you select for each table? So now we need to select the correct storage mode for this. Now, if we go to let's say the options that you basically have. So this is how they normally ask you to maybe like answer some of the questions, right? So you can see that they would normally give you a case and a scenario, and then after that you have to answer this question. So you would have multiple options. So customer, you need to select whether you're going to do a direct query, or you're going to do a dual, or you're going to do an import, then for the date and all of that, right? The only way you can actually answer this question is if you understand all of those different storage modes. So before we think about the answer to this question, I want us to go to the different storage modes just to refresh our memory and to understand in which cases you might select the other, right? So let's start by understanding, right? If you go to the import, right? So the import, this one means that your data is fully loaded into Power BI, right? The data is actually stored in Power BI, and then in terms of performance, getting the data is actually much more efficient because the data is already there. So when you do any calculation, you get the data in real time, right? This requires a scheduled refresh to update the data. Now, because you're importing the data, if there's any changes, you need to also manually sort of like schedule the refresh for the data. So that's very important. Now, when is it best to actually use the import method? Use the import method if you know that your data is smaller to medium. It's a small to medium data set. It requires high performance, so it's for high performance dashboards, and complex text formulas. So if you're going to have any of those three things, then you want to use the import, right? Cool. If we go to direct query, so direct query basically says the data stays in the system source. So your data would stay in that particular system where it was actually created from. So in essence, you are connecting to a database. You are not importing the data from a database and bringing it into your system. Very important to understand. And Power BI sends queries in real time to actually get data. Then the other one, no data is actually stored in the model, so it can actually slow the performance or the rate or the time it actually takes for you to get your data. Because when you make any changes, then Power BI needs to go and call your database and pull the data in order to get certain results. So it could actually impact, let's say, the performance of your dashboard, right? Cool. Then the other one, it's best to also only use the direct query if you've got large data sets and you want real-time reporting and you want strict data governance requirements, right? Because you're connected live to the database, that means that if there is changes, those changes are then refreshed automatically. You don't have to schedule for refreshes, right? So that's something that's very important. And then let's talk about the dual mode here. So this is basically the best of both worlds. So this is a combination of an import and a direct query. So some tables can be cached or others require, let's say, live insights and stuff like that. So if you don't want entirely to pull data from the database every single time, but you just want to have a certain amount of data stored within Power BI, then you want to use the dual method, right? Because it actually gives you that option. It's good for, it actually optimizes performance in a composite or sort of like model. So this means that you've got import and you've got also direct query, right? So that's the only time you'd want to use this. This is best if you've got a scenario where you've got mixed, let's say, data sets, data coming from different sources. Some of it is real time and some of it is not real time. There's so many different other things, right? Cool. Then lastly, you've got the aggregate table. So it's good for aggregate tables. So if you've got any summarized data and anything like that, it's actually very good for that. All right, cool. Hopefully that actually refreshes your memories in terms of those different storage methods, right? Cool. So now let's go back. Let's think about this, right? If we go back to the question, let's understand the customer data, right? You guys can also add, you can also comment on the chat. So which option do you think would be correct for the customer data? If I go to this diagram, I can see that, okay, cool, we've got customer data. It's actually linked to the sales data set, right? Very important. You need to firstly understand which data sets is this table actually linked to. So if I go here, customer data must be refreshed daily, but it's actually linked to the sales data set, which must be refreshed in near real time. Very important. So the relationship between the customer data set and the sales data set is also very important. Now, based on that, if we wanted to minimize the time it takes to load the data, and also to ensure that the data is loaded to the model based on the refresh requirements. Which method do you guys think would be actually best for us to actually use? So over here, we've got direct query, we've got dual query, and we've got import. Now, I'm going to do a process of elimination here, right? So I think direct query actually does not work for us. And the reason why I say direct query does not work for us is because the customer dataset does not require real-time insights. So we don't have to get real-time insights from the customer dataset. So for me, it wouldn't necessarily work for the solution that we're trying to build, right? Cool. So I can see others are saying Joel. That's a good one. And then I'm going to skip Joel because I think it's the correct answer, right? Then the other option is selecting the import, right? Why wouldn't an import actually work? If you look at it, it says customer data must be refreshed daily, right? There is a bit of an admin if you're going to be doing it at a daily basis and you're going to be importing data. For me, that wouldn't necessarily work. And you've got another problem that your sales data set refreshes in real time. So because you've got a data set that relies, so the sales data set relies on the customer data. So if there's any changes on the customers, you sort of want to get those changes immediately as you can. So which is why in this instance, the best solution for what we're trying to do would be the dual solution because it's in between. Because on the other side, you've got a data set that requires real-time intelligence and you want to choose the best solution that also doesn't take so much time to actually refresh your data. So the direct query might not be the best one because we know that customer data does not require, let's say, an immediate refresh, right? So very good. I see everyone is saying Jewel, so the correct answer actually is Jewel. Now, let's go to the date, right? If we go to the date data set, right, it says the date must be refreshed every 3 years. Now, if you think about 3 years, automatically I'm probably saying, okay, 3 years is a bit of a long time, right? We could actually import this data and that could be fine, right? So because it's 3 years, we know that direct query is definitely not going to work. We cannot choose a direct query because in 3 years, you don't want to have real-time extraction of data from a particular database. So direct query is eliminated. Now we've got dual and import, right? Cool. Now let's think about this. So the date must be refreshed once every 3 years. Very important. But the other thing that is important is which other data set is this actually connected to? Now, if you look at this, the date column, date table is actually connected to the sales data. So whenever sales transactions are actually happening, you want to be able to pull data from the date table as much as you can. So you don't want to have an issue of maybe latency and all of that. So you want to find the balance between a direct query and an import. So therefore, the same solution that actually worked for the customer should actually work for the date. And the reason why I see some answers are saying I see there is import. So the reason why import would not work in this case is because it's actually connected to the sales data set, and the sales data set actually processes data in real time. So it might be an issue if you've got an import and all of that. So you want to find the middle ground, which would be the dual option, because it's connected to the sales data set. So the sales data set actually is very important because it impacts a lot of things due to the rate it actually wants to get that data, right? So you see, this is how you basically would analyze all of these different questions and scenarios. So it's very important that you pay attention to, let's say, what tables it's actually linked to, and you need to find the balance in between. So in some cases, if it's connected to a table that also refreshes every 3 years, then you just want to use an import because there is no impact in you actually doing that, right? Cool. So the next one is the sales data set. I think this one is an easy one, honestly, because it says the cells must be refreshed when? In real time. Because it immediately tells us sales data must be refreshed in real time. If we go over here, when you want real-time reporting, your best bet is direct query. So that one is an easy win. We will definitely just go for direct query. Great. Now the next one is the sales aggregate. So what do we choose for the sales aggregate? If we look at the sales aggregate, right, this is aggregate data. Very important. And I think the other thing to pay attention to is that it's linked to this data set. This data set is refreshed. This data set is actually refreshed, I think, once. I think this is actually once every 3 years. And then this data set is refreshed. Let's just confirm. Then this one is refreshed daily, right? No, you're not too late. We just started with the first question. Okay, yeah, we actually just started. Cool. So now let's think about this one, right? Without, if you read this, the accurate data must be refreshed once a week. I could get away with a direct query if you think about it. I could definitely get away with a direct query, right? Not really a direct query, but an import. I could just import the data and then refresh it every single week, right? Or I can go for the dual mode where I can just, let's say, have the data there, right? But here's my thinking, right? We actually do not need to use the dual, and we do not need it there. So direct query is eliminated because this data set is basically refreshed, I think, what is it? Once every week. So it doesn't make sense for you to actually have the data set actually being refreshed immediately when it's done daily or once every week, right? Now, the second part is the dual method is a bit too much. The reason why I would say it's a bit too much is because the data set that this is actually dependent on do not process the data as fast as the sales one, right? The reason why on the sales data set we actually chose the dual was because there's two actually connected to a data set that refreshes in real time. But in this case, these two do not refresh in real time. So let's say doing a dual method could actually put pressure on our database at the same time. And if we wanted to also improve efficiency, you want to just import the data because there is not so many changes that are going to be putting pressure on your database because it's not connected to data sets that have a lot of, let's say, data requirements and all of that. Hopefully that actually answers the question. So in this one, I would actually use an import method. Any questions? Anyone with a different, let's say, answer towards that one? Okay, so that one is going to be an import query, right? So for this one, the last one, this is helpful information. Are we going to get the slides? Yeah, you guys are going to get the slides. But I'm just wondering, how am I going to share the slides? Yeah, I think I need to figure out how am I going to share the slides. Maybe I can just put a link or something like that. But yeah, so that's how you, so in terms of how you decide, so you firstly start from these different ways of actually, let's say, direct import, dual or direct query. But the last thing that really helps you to make your final decision is you need to look at it and understand which other data sets is this actually connected to, because that would then help you with making that final decision of saying, maybe I need to use that, maybe I need to use that. So think about the tables it's actually connected to and the speed at which there is a requirement for the data. Yeah, actually, it was a very tricky one. Like you could use aggregate, but because if it was connected to the cells, definitely, because the speed actually does matter in that sense. But yeah, okay, cool. Okay, now we can move on to the next question. So this is the other format that they actually use to ask the question. So you see that you get, let's say, some sort of description of a scenario, and then after that, they actually give you, let's say, more information and insights, right? Cool. Now, question number 2. So this question relates to something that we call get data. So it's actually the first part of how do you actually get data. So now let's read the scenario and understand. So it says you have a project, okay, you have a project management app that is fully hosted on Microsoft Teams, right? It's fully hosted where? On Microsoft Teams. The app was developed using Microsoft apps, Power Apps. So it's actually developed using Microsoft Power Apps. And you need to create a Power BI report that connects to the project management app, which connector should you select? Now I just want to see which answer would you guys select? Anyone who wants to take a try? Is it A? Is it B? Is it C? Is it D? Which answer would you select in this case? Okay, I see B, SQL. Okay, I see C. Okay, let's think about this, right? Okay, let's look at the first option. The first option, I think if you think about where the clue actually is in, right? The clue is actually, I know this Microsoft Teams thing can be misleading, but for me, the clue says the app was developed using Microsoft Power Apps, right? If you guys think about Microsoft Power Apps, in the Microsoft Power Apps world, you've got Power BI, you've got Power Automate, and the Power Apps basically have their own platform where they store data. So Power Apps have their own dedicated product where they actually store data. They don't store data in any place, right? So that was, for me, that is the key important area. Now, it says, which connector should you select? Microsoft Teams Personal Analytics, I don't think so, because this application is built using Power Apps. I don't think this should be the database that we're going to use. SQL Server, I don't think there is any evidence that actually indicates that SQL Server is actually used, right? I'm going to skip C and I'm going to go to D, right? Data flows. Well, data flows, this is more about data pipelines. So it's more about, so someone builds data pipelines, maybe you might connect to a data pipeline to pull data from that particular pipeline. But I don't think that is going to work. Now, the answer is actually here. So I got this for you guys just to explain a little bit, right? So in the Power Platform world, right, there is Power BI, there's Power Apps, there's Power Automate, there's something called Power Virtual Agents, then you've got something called Power Pages, right? So those are sort of like the different things that you basically have in that world. So all of these applications, in most cases, if you're going to develop a Power App application, by default, you're going to use Dataverse, right? Because Dataverse is actually the storage service management platform that they actually provide. I think this was a very tricky question because unless you've got some knowledge of Power Apps or Power Platforms, you might struggle to actually answer this question. But for me, the key was Power Apps because the data that you develop using Power Apps is most likely going to be stored under Dataverse. So that's why Dataverse is actually the correct answer because the key word there was actually Power Apps, right? Hopefully that answers everyone. So SQL Server, there's no evidence, honestly, that we can say is indicating that it's stored there. Data flows, that's something completely different. It's really about connecting to an existing data flow and stuff like that. Microsoft Personal Analytics, I don't think we can actually use that because that's a Microsoft, that's a Power App that actually is connecting to the data. Cool. Hopefully that helps us in understanding that question, right? Cool. Now, the next question, hopefully this one won't be as tricky as the other questions, right? So the next question, this one is more about model data, right? If you guys remember, model data now goes into more about building relationships between data sets, right? Very important. So now the first question says, for the sales department at your company, very important. I think it's very important to just pay attention to how the questions are actually worded. For the sales department at your company, you publish a Power BI dashboard that imports data from a Microsoft Excel file located in the Microsoft SharePoint folder. You've already done the publishing. Great. Now it then says the data model contains several measures, right? So the dashboard that you created had a lot of measures. So you heavy lifting and a lot of work, right? For those that may already be thinking of the answer, you can already just pop the answer to this question while I'm still explaining this whole thing. And then the other part that's important, you need to create a Power BI dashboard or Power BI report from an existing data set. That's a very important keyword, from existing data. Right, great. Now, the solution must maintain minimum development effort. So it's also saying that you shouldn't spend a lot of time developing anything new or something like that. Right, great. And then the question then says, which type of data source should you use? I see we've got A. What data set would you actually use? Okay, seems like more people are actually going with A. Okay, that's great. Okay, A actually is the correct answer, right? And I'm going to explain over here. Now, if you think about it, right, let's do an analysis of this question. So if we do the analysis for the question, it basically says the key clues in this question are a report is already published, right? So someone has actually published a report. Secondly, the data model already contains several measures. So you don't want to spend a lot of time, right? And then the other thing says you must minimize development effort, and you need to create a new report from an existing data set. So when you are actually reading these questions, those are some of the keywords that you pay attention to, because they do as much as they can to actually trick you into thinking that maybe you need to use an existing data set. So the questions are very tricky, but always make sure that you read the question and all of that. Yes, I agree. A, since the report was already published. Now let's look at the options that we had. So if you think about connecting to SharePoint, if you connected your data to SharePoint, that means you need to rebuild the model. You are going to spend much more effort and time rebuilding an entire new model, right? So that one is not really, let's say, the best option that we will have to go with, right? The second one says the Excel workbook. This one also wouldn't work. You need to rebuild the model still, so it's still a lot of work. The last one is data flow. Now, I feel like the data flows is more from like data preparation, not reusing any data sets, because if you're building data flows, it's a whole data engineering process and stuff like that. So I feel like that one is definitely not correct. The correct answer is the Power BI data set, because you already have a model that's working. So just use a semantic model that's actually existing, and you just reuse existing model and data, and you've got your results. So that's why that one is the correct answer. So the key words were, firstly, you have a dashboard that you've created, and you need to minimize development effort, and you need to create it using existing data. So that's why that is actually the best option for us in this case. Okay, cool. Hopefully that one helps everyone in understanding. Okay, actually we are going through the questions faster than I thought. I think it might actually give us more time to go through text formulas. Okay, so next question now. So this is another type of question. So this one is more focused on data transformation. It's more about merging and all of that, right? So this is a very, very important one. I think for this one, I wanted to do a demo, right? Let me see if I can still bring my Power BI demo over here. I'm just opening Power BI. Okay, I see there's that. I just want to check if everyone can see my Power BI dashboard. Can anyone see my Power BI dashboard? Okay, it seems like okay, no one can see it yet. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try. And share my screen again, entire window, and I'm going to go to this one. Again by this network. Okay, great. We are back. Yeah. No, you are not allowed to open Power BI in the exam, but one thing that I know is that you are allowed to, I think they do allow you to look at the question papers. I think they do allow you to actually do that. Okay, I think my screen is no longer sharing now. That is strange. Okay, we are back now. Great. Yeah, so in essence, they don't allow you to open Power BI, but they do allow you to like open, let's say you can refer back to your notes, but I don't recommend that one because I feel like it also takes a lot of time from you. So it rather not do that. Honestly, I don't think it's the best thing to do. Honestly, it can actually cause issues for you. All right, cool. So what I wanted to do is to take you guys to here where we normally would transform our data. All right. So I'm going to go to transform data set. Let's see if it's working. I've got other screens on the side just to check if the recording is actually changing. Okay, cool. I think it's just loading. Sorry, guys. Okay, great. So over here, I think this is something that's very important also for data cleaning. I thought I should just also take you guys through this since we are in a section that speaks about the data cleaning and stuff like that, right? So when it comes to your data cleaning, you've got various things that you can actually do, right? So over here, you've got the different techniques of actually cleaning your data and all of that, right? But what's important, if you go to view over here, right, they actually do ask you in the exam about these things, right? So I'm going to turn off this and I want to show you something, right? If I turn on the column profile, right? So what column profile actually does, it gives you more insights about, let's say, the statistics of your data set, right? That's something that's really important. So in the exam, if they ask you which setting you should turn on in order to get statistics regarding your data, that's probably going to be your column distribution, right? So that's what column distribution, column profile, sorry, that's column profile. That's what column profile actually does, right? The other important feature is basically the column distribution. Now, this one is very important because column distribution basically tells you how your data is actually being distributed, right? And it's very important for you to be able to read what these numbers actually mean. So what these numbers actually, if you read this, right, if they ask you in the exam, or maybe they give you a screenshot like this, if they ask you, do you think there is a duplicate amount in this column? I would immediately say yes, there is a duplicate amount because we've got 19 distinct and we've got 18 unique. I think a lot of people normally get confused when they see these numbers and what these numbers actually mean. So what distinct actually means is that in this over here, you've got 19 different numbers. That's what it means. You've got 19 different numbers that are appearing on this column. And what the unique actually says is that from the 19 numbers that you actually have, only 18 of them appear once. So it says that only 18 out of the 19 of the numbers you have are unique. So meaning that there is one number that actually repeats more than once. So if there's even a single number that actually repeats more than once, it actually makes this number lower, because if you look at here, the 7 was actually repeated twice. So when you're reading this number, it means you've got 19 different numbers, but only 18 of them are unique, meaning that there was a repetition of one of the numbers. So this is normally a good indicator of whether there is duplicates or not duplicates. So in the exam, if they give you this picture and ask you based on these numbers, do you think there's a duplicate or there's not duplicate? That's how you basically pick this up. So this column distribution tells you how your data is actually distributed, right? It's a very important column to understand. The other one that I normally turn on is called the column quality, right? If they ask you how do you get to see a summary of the quality of your data, you would normally see the summary of the quality of your data under the column quality. So column quality tells you how many errors you have, how many of them is empty, and stuff like that, how much of it is valid. So this literally gives you statistics before you actually spend time doing your data cleaning and stuff like that. So in the exam, they will ask you about the difference between these three, right? They'll ask you if you wanted to see the quality of your data, which one do you turn on? Well, this one might be self-explanatory, column quality, but if you wanted to know insights, statistics about your data, you want to turn on the column profile. And distribution tells you about the uniqueness and duplicates, or how, sort of like the distribution of your data basically that you actually have, right? It is confusing because if there are sevens, how are they both distinct? Yeah, actually that's actually true. So what it actually does, it will count the first 7, right? So the first 7 will be regarded as unique. The moment you get another 7, it stops the count. So that's how it actually works. So if there was a 1, I think my device is about to die, but yeah, I'm just gonna plug it quickly. So if there was a 1, basically, if you think about it, if 1 appears once, it does a count, and then it calls that a unique count. If 1 appears again, it actually does not count 1 again because it's already been counted. So, which is why the number of distinct would be higher and then the number of unique would be lower, because if it appears the first time, we count it. If it appears for the second time, we do not count it. Therefore, the number would actually be lower. So that's how they would normally record these ones. So any questions regarding these ones while I'm just connecting my device to the charger? Okay, I'm back. Okay, so distinct is the number of records. Yes, I think that's actually a good way of thinking about it. So distinct is the number of records, right? And then unique is the count of how many records only appeared once. I think that's actually the best way to explain it. So if you've got 19 records and you've got 19 of them unique, that means that some of them actually appeared more than once. Now, if you've got 19 distinct and 19 unique, then that means that you actually do not have duplicates. Yes, I see someone just say the same number means no duplicates. Exactly. If you've got 19 different, let's say, records, right, and you've got 19 unique items on that list, and the numbers is actually the same, that actually means that none of them appeared more than once. So that's how the whole thing actually works. So it's a tricky one, and they love asking this one in the exam. So you might be lucky if they don't ask about it. They really find creative ways of asking about this one in the exam, just to see if you understand and stuff like that. So that's something that's very important to pay attention to, right? So in the exam, what I'm thinking, they might also say, if you wanted to get the quality of your data without spending any effort, which options would you actually select, right? So if they asked you the question in that manner, then you would basically be able to say, okay, cool, actually then there is an issue. Okay, how are nulls? So what Power BI does, right? That's a very, very good question, right? So what Power BI does, if there is any empty records, if there is any nulls, I think this data set is very clean because I was actually cleaning this data set, right? If there is, let's say, any empty records, by default, Power BI will just allocate the null, right? So you can still count them because they've allocated the null sort of like text in your numbers, but you still have to clean your data set. So the nulls would still be counted even though they're not, let's say, part of the records. So Power BI automatically assigns sort of values to just account for the missing spaces. Okay, cool. While we're still here, the other important, so that you've got other very important features, right? You've got something that we call merge and append, right? This is another feature that they love asking about during the exam. They will ask you quite a lot about the null and the append, so it's very important that you pay attention to the use cases and differences between this one, right? So the append, very important. Append only works if you've got tables that have got the same columns, the same number of columns, and the same, let's say, column names, basically, right? If you literally have copies of a table that are really the same in terms of the column names, you just want to use append, right? So append basically means that you take a table and then you start matching the table from below. If I can do an example, right? If I maybe did this, if I copy this, and I duplicate this, right? You agree with me that the music sales is actually the same as the music sales number 2, right? So if I came here and I say append, and I can say append or append as new. So append as new is useful if you want to create an entire new query. But if you want to just continue with an existing query, that's also fine. But what I'm going to do is say append. So you can see that it will ask you from the first table. So this is the first table over here. Then you specify the second table. What this is going to do, it's going to take, it's going to bring whatever data is sitting on this table and add it just below here. So we're probably going to have 40 we're going to have 40 records in essence, right? So if you had more than 2 tables, you can select 3 or more tables. It actually gives you that option to actually append and add more and stuff like that. So if I do this, then you can see we've got a new table. Now there's 40 records. It literally just appended records that are similar together, right? This is useful. Let's say you work in a company, right? And your manager, let's say, gives you 9 different data sets. They all have the same columns, but maybe the first one is for the sales that we made in January. The other one is sales that we made in February, March, April. But these are all different Excel documents, and you just want a quicker way of actually combining them. Then you want to use the append because the data is actually the same. If the columns are not the same, actually not the data, but the columns, if the columns are not the same, or you don't have the same number of columns, so it must be the same column names and the same number of columns. That's the only way this actually works, right? Cool. Now, let's say the other method, let's say you don't want to append your data set, right? Your data does not have the same columns, but it has certain information that you want from the other table, right? Let's say maybe you've got a customer ID and the customer name, and then the other table has got customer ID and also, let's say, the customer, let's say, transaction. What you want to do, because you want to get those details, you can actually use merge. So what merge actually does, it allows you to join different tables. So you'll see that the moment you say merge, it will automatically ask you to say, do you want to do, right? You can then select the table. Do you want to do a left outer? Do you want to do a right inner, a full outer? So we're going to actually go through these examples. But what's important to understand is that you use the append if you know that your column names are the same and you've got the same number of columns. If you've got different column names and tables, then you want to use the match, basically. So on append, say the data is imported from Excel, which you have to create a separate query where you promote the first row as headers before. No, you don't have to. You literally just append it because the columns are actually the same. So you don't have to promote the headers at all. If you look at this one, I created a copy. So this cells number 2 is basically the same. You've got the columns are already here, and then you've got the other one that actually has got the rank, the music and stuff. So it's literally the same column names. But if you say append, it by default automatically it's going to drop this column, these headings, and just bring in the data. So it's not going to bring in also the headings and stuff like that. It's just going to bring in your data as it is. Yes, that's great. So merge works as a left or right inner join, basically. Yeah, it's literally like that. I think you are more familiar from like with the SQL scripting and stuff like that. And definitely that's how it actually works. So that's another very important feature that you need to keep, you need to sort of like pay attention to, right? So I just wanted to highlight these features. So we will come back to this, but I thought it would be really good to just highlight some of these features. You've got a lot of other features, like you can keep rows at the top. You can decide to remove columns. So you've got the option of actually removing columns. You can split by column. So this one is similar to something that we normally say, I think we call it text to column in the world of Excel data sets. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Excel work, but this is where you want to split, let's say, certain columns depending on what you want to see. I want to see if I can actually use it. I want to see if I can reverse this data set. So I'm going to do this. Maybe I can demonstrate the split for you guys. I think it's another important feature to understand. Right, cool. So when do you actually use the split column, right? If you look at this data set, we've got a problem with this column because you've got here and then you've got this line over here, and then you've got here and then you've got this line over here. Now, if you wanted to separate these two, you'd basically select this and then say split by column. Then you can say delimiter, or you can choose whatever that you want to choose. If you say delimiter, now what Power BI does, it will automatically detect what is actually causing the separation issue, and then it's going to give you this option. And then if I say okay, you can see that it has actually separated the data for us automatically. So now we've got this here over here, then we've got the other here over here. So in the exam, they might actually ask you that you've got a data set that has got this issue, and if you wanted to separate it, what would you use? So firstly, you'd use split by column, and then you use the delimiter, right? If there's a common or consistent delimiter. So that's another very important feature that they tend to sort of try to ask you in the exam, just to test if you know what options you have for cleaning your data, right? And I think that's really the important thing that they try to do in the exam. They want to test your knowledge and understanding of the features that Power BI actually has. So they also love asking this one quite a lot. Okay, cool. Let me see if I can go back to the presentation. Okay, great. So now we're going to switch back to the presentation. Hopefully some of the things that we covered are going to help, because the next 2 or 3 questions actually touch upon those areas that we were actually speaking about, right? Cool. So now back to our music analysis, right? Let's not music, the actual question, right? So question number 4 says, you import 2 Excel tables, right? Very important. You've got 2 Excel tables. You've got this one here would be the customer, and you've got the address, right? You are importing this to Power Query. That is what we were basically looking at, right? And then the customer and address contain the following data sets. So this data actually belongs to the address table, and this data set actually belongs to the customer table. Now, what's important to note is that you've got the address ID on the customer area here, and you also have the address ID over here. So that's very important to make note of, right? Let's see what more we've got. Now, they say each customer ID represents a unique customer in the customer table. And each address ID represents a unique address in the address table. Now you need to create a query that has one row per customer. Very important, one row per customer. Each row must contain the city, the state, the region, and the country. Now, if we go back over here, the problem is that all of this data actually is sitting on the address table and it's not sitting on the customer table. Now, the first thing that's important, we can already see that we cannot append anything here. The reason why we cannot append anything, these columns are not the same. So if you were to see an option that's basically saying that you can append your data set, you already know that that option is actually wrong. You actually cannot append your data set, right? So what we're trying to do is to get to a point where we've got a table that will have the customer ID, the city that the customer comes from, the state that the customer comes from, the region, the country for each of those. Now, if you already have an idea of what is the answer, I would like you to put the answer onto the chat, right? So we're trying to have all of this information linked to this table, right? We just want to bring this information to this table. Maybe we can have the customer table and just an extension of this. So in all honesty, we just want to bring the city, the region, and the country as part of this, right? Cool. Now, if you think about this, these are the options that they've given us. So A, you are going to merge the customer and the address tables. Okay, I hear you. B, you're going to group the customer and the address tables by the address ID. Maybe it might work, maybe it won't work, but the grouping for me, I feel like it's going to create summarized data sets, right? Transpose, definitely not going to work. Append, you are not going to use append because append only works if you're trying to combine two different tables that basically have, let's say, the same column name. So in this case, merge actually is the solution. So you see, this is how you pick up the questions that might be wrong, or maybe the best way to actually answer the question. So because we now understand that if you wanted to bring this information to this table, you just need to basically merge these two tables, right? And you just select what you need. So that's why I think the correct answer is A, right? Actually, I already did a demo for you guys, so yeah, I actually covered this one. Okay, cool. I think everyone is comfortable with the other question. So it was an easy one because column names are not the same. You probably want to match the data set. Okay, cool. I'm just checking if this is the last question. Okay, it's not the last question. Cool. Okay, it's another very interesting one, right? So the question basically says, so this question 5 looks at combining data from multiple sources, right? So it's more related to appending queries. I think this one is a better clue. So now you have got two SQL, you've got two Azure SQL databases that contain the same tables, right? Very important, same tables, definitely in append. Same tables and columns. Now for each database, you create a query that retrieves data from the table named customer, right? You need to combine the customer tables into a single table. I think that's a very important key. You need to combine the customer tables into a single table. Now for me, what this immediately says is that we are going to append as new, because we are combining this data into an entirely new table, into an entire a new table that actually did not exist. So for me, before even seeing anything, I can already tell that we are definitely going to append as new, right? That's the clue over there. Combine the customer table into a single table. So you're creating an entire new table that is independent of the other tables. Then the second part says the solution must minimize the size of the data model and support scheduled refresh in powerbi.com, right? It's another very important clue. Minimize the size, right? I'm going to go back over here and hopefully you guys can see my presentation, right? Cool. Now, I'm going to explain something that is going to give us a clue on how exactly we're going to approach this, or how we're going to go about this, right? So what this solution is saying is that we've got two different tables. We've got the music's, let's just assume, right? Let's assume that this is the customer and this is also the customer, right? And we are supposed to create an entirely new table. So we append this table into the new table set, right? Cool. Now, the other problem that I'm also seeing is that we need to refresh this data. Now, because we have created we've now got three different tables. If I were to, let's say, refresh if the data were to refresh, it is going to refresh the data for all of these three. So that's going to take a lot of, that is going to be an issue for, let's say, Power BI. It's going to put stress on Power BI. That's something that's also very important, right? So I would think about a workaround around that. So that means maybe you want to disconnect the refreshes from this one and that one, and only leave it for the append, because that's a new table. That's the table that you're going to be using moving forward. So for me, just looking at the question, those are some of the things that I'm thinking about. Cool. Now let's go customer tables into a single table, and secondly, minimize the size of the data model. Great. Now, these are the options that we have. Now, if you're already seeing this and you feel like you already have an answer, or you've got an idea of what could be the correct answer, you can just add it onto the chat. Now, the first option basically says, option 1, use to combine the customer table. So what are you going to use? Are you going to merge? Firstly, merge is not going to work because we already know that these tables are basically the same, right? We've got the same columns and stuff like that. So I would not use merge in that case, right? And then, so all of the other options that are saying merge, I'm definitely not going to use them. So we've got two options here that are very important for us to decide which one is actually the best answer. So we've got append queries and we've got append as new. So the problem with append queries, right? I'm going to show you the problem with this one. Hopefully it allows me to demonstrate. Append query as new, disable, including, okay. I think you guys are already on the right track. Okay, yeah, that's actually the correct answer, right? So because they said you need to create an entire new table that is independent of the other table, I would say append as new. So that is the first answer, append as new, because append queries doesn't make sense because you're just combining the two tables. You're not creating something that is new. And the question requires you to create something new. So you see, this is how they actually trick you into seeing if you understand the best solution for the particular problem that you're actually solving. So the first one, definitely right. Cool. Now this one says, action to perform the original two SQL database queries, right? Now, if you guys remember, if we come back over here, someone said the solution must minimize the size of the data model, and you still need to support refreshing. And then you've got option say, delete the queries. Are you going to delete the other two tables that we're no longer using? Are you going to disable including the refresh in the report? Or are you going to disable loading the query to the data model? Or are you going to duplicate the queries? Right. And for me, what I'm going to select is disable including the query in the report, right? Because we don't need these other tables anymore, because we've created an entire new table. We don't need to refresh those tables. We could just refresh the table, the new table that we've actually created, and that actually saves us like a lot of time. Quick one, how do you know it should be new? Wouldn't append query make it single? So let me maybe demonstrate this. That's a very important one, right? Cool. Let's think about this, right? I'm just going to see. Maybe let me delete this one, right? Okay, this is not going to work. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do this, right? I'm going to create. I'm going to duplicate this, right? And let's just assume this was custom. I'm just going to rename this for the purpose of this example, right? You've got customer 1, and you've also got customer 2. You got customer 2, right? These are the 2 tables that you have, right? Let's use append. Let's do this. I'm going to say append, right? So when you say append, it's going to do this. 2 tables, and I will select. So append 2. So the current table is 2. Then I need to append this to table number 1, and I'm going to say okay. Okay. So now we appended the data that was sitting over here to this table. Now, do you see that table number 2 now has much more data, right? So this is going to be a problem because now this 2, if you think about it, this one is now independent, right? But this one is not independent. And we want to create an entire new table that is going to be independent, right? So what we need to do is to rather say append as new, because if you say append as new, what it allows you to do is you can say customer 1 and customer number 2, and you can say new. Now you will see that it's going to create an entire new table. We don't want to mess with those tables. We still want to keep the data on those tables, but what we don't want to do is to continuously refresh those particular tables. So this is a solution for us in terms of actually we get the data that was existing in those tables and we disable refreshes, and then we only refresh the new table. It actually saves us a lot of time, and it actually saves a lot of, let's say, heavy lifting in the dashboard itself. So hopefully that helps you with because you said, how do you know if it should be new, or wouldn't append query make it single? Yes, so if you use the first option, it basically combines it with the whatever table that you decided to combine it with. So you still have 2 tables. But if you say new, it creates an entire new table separate from the others. Then you can disconnect the others. Yeah. Okay, I'm not sure if it was an audio thing, but hopefully I am back now. Yeah, I was just reading the chat. So hopefully that clarifies that particular question. So in this case, what we'll choose definitely is the append as new and then disable, right? Cool. So I think I did sort of add a couple of notes on this one, but I think we've already touched upon this one. Okay, cool. Now, the next one that I think is important is the join types, right? So I thought what we should do, I think this is probably the last slide. So we are almost there. We are about to jump onto DEX formulas. If you were waiting for DEX formulas, don't worry. We are actually getting there. Okay, that is odd. Oh, I almost thought we lost an entire page. Okay, cool. We actually still have this page. Great. So when you match your data set, right, you need to understand that there's different types of joins that you basically get access to, right? I think before we get into the detail, I think it's important that we understand the different types of joins, right? So you've got there's basically, I think about 6. There's 6 different types of joins that you've got access to when you're using Power BI, right? And I'm just going to quickly show you. And this is applicable only when you're merging data sets, right? If I say merge queries, you will see that if I do a drop down, so these are all the different types of joins. Very important. So it's very important to understand them because they do ask you in the exam to say which one is actually the best join to actually use in whatever that you're doing. So your understanding of these joins is going to be very, 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 very important, right? So luckily I've created something on the side here, right? So we're going to go through each of those different joins just to understand what they actually mean. So the first one is an inner join. So an inner join basically means that retain, so if you think about this, retain only return only rows that match in both the tables. So if you've got tables and you just want to get records that actually match between the tables and you want to use an inner join, so it would remove any, let's say, unmatching rows in that particular table, right? So I think that's something that's very important. So inner join actually only gets records that are matching between two different types of tables. Okay, cool. Makes sense. Okay, great. Then the next one is the left join. So what does the left join actually do? The left join actually retains all the rows from the left table, right? So the left table would basically be, let's say, the table on your left. I think that's the best way to actually think about it. The table on your left, right? So it retains it will retain everything from the left table and retain matching rows from the right table. So if there's any rows that belong to the right table and they do not match the left table, those rows would not be retained, right? It's just going to be blank and all of that. If no matching rows exist, the right side column shows null, and most commonly used to join. So you normally use this quite a lot. I think it's a very, I use the left join quite a lot, especially if I only want to get matching results and I want to see which ones actually do not have matching results. So it depends on what you're trying to do. Then the other one is the right outer, right? So the right outer, what this one actually does, it retains all the rows from the right table. So in this case, it will be the table on your right, right? It retains matching rows from the table on your right, and if no matching records are found on the left side, it actually creates a null. So this is actually the opposite of the left outer. So the right outer is the inverse of the other one, right? Cool. Then you've got the full outer. Now the full outer, what it does, it retains all the rows from both the tables. Matches where possible and fills unmatched rows with null values. So this one, it brings everything. I think this is the worst one to actually use. It consumes a lot of space in your data because it literally retains everything. So it consumes a lot. If you're trying to save space, you don't want to use the full outer, right? Then you've got the left anti-join. So the left anti-join retains only rows from the left table that have no match in the right table. It used to identify missing or mismatches between records. Then you've got the right anti, which is the retains only rows from the right side of the table and no matching rows in the left side of the table, right? I see there's a couple of questions. Do you need to specify the column you are matching to the? Yeah, actually, that's a good question. You actually do need to specify, because if you look at this, so if you're doing a match, you select, no, actually you don't have to. You don't have to specify the columns. You know why? It will only work if there is a relationship between the tables, right? So it will only work if there is a common, let's say, for example, rank is actually common between these two. So you just specify the tables, and then after that you specify this, and then if it's working, then it will just say, okay, then it actually works. So these are the things that you'd basically specify. So what's important to understand is that you cannot match tables that do not have, let's say, similar keys. If you've got a primary key, it needs to be a foreign key in the other one. If the key does not exist on the other table, just as when you're writing an SQL script, right? If you're writing an SQL script, that script only works if there is a foreign key on the other one. If there is no similar keys between the tables, it actually does not work. Right. So by default, you just need to specify the kind of join, and then it just figures out how to actually do things. So I think that's a very good question. Okay, cool. I just need to close this. All right, great. So now that we are familiar with all these different keys and whatever, so I thought maybe we can just go back over here, right? What does fuzzy matching mean? I've actually never used fuzzy matching, but I feel like it's probably, yeah, honestly, I've never used it. My thinking, or maybe what I could think fuzzy matching is about, it's finding, let's say, values that are closely similar but not entirely similar. I think that's what I can think fuzzy matching being, but I think I can do more research today. Maybe we can speak about it tomorrow more. Right, cool. But thank you for that one. I've actually never used it, honestly, but I'll just do more reading about it. Cool. So let's read our question. What is our question saying, and what does our question want us to actually do? Right, cool. So the question says, Power Query Editor. On Power Query Editor, you've got 3 queries, right? 3 queries, very important. You've got the product category, you've got the subcategory, and you've got the product. Every product has a subcategory, and not every subcategory has a parent category. Okay, that's interesting. Now you need to merge the 3 queries. Very important. Now you need to merge the 3 queries into a single query. The solution must ensure the best performance in Power Query. Now, that is a very important word. They said the solution must ensure the best performance. I'm going to show you this. In terms of best performance, I can already tell you this left anti, the full outer is a problem for me. Like the full outer takes a lot of space. So definitely we're gonna eliminate the full outer, right? We're probably not gonna use it, honestly, right? So what I think we should do, just to understand what this thing is, I'm going to see if I can stop the presentation. I'm going to end the show. Okay, cool. What I'm going to do, I want to take this information over here, right? I'm going to bring it here. Okay, I'm just going to change this. Okay. I want us to think about this, right? So I'm going to see if I can try drawing something that actually makes sense. So I'm going to take this. Right. So we've got that table over there. And then we've got this table, not that. Right. And I'm going to bring this table over here. Okay, hopefully my drawings actually make sense. Okay, cool. I'm gonna go back here. Now let's assume that, okay, it's not going to work like that. I'm gonna do this. Let's assume that this is the product, right? This is the product, and this would be the product subcategory, right? And then this is going to be the product category. Okay, great, we've got that, cool. So every product has a product subcategory. So every product has a product subcategory. So that means there should be a matching record now. Let's understand this. Every product has a product subcategory. That means that every product that actually exists here has got a matching result on the product subcategory. Now, if we go back to our description here, this one says return only rows that match in both tables. So we already know that we're expecting matching results in both of those tables because the rule actually says, the rule actually tells us that every product has a product subcategory. I'm already thinking that an inner join is what we need, right? We don't need to waste any space in the table. We already can see that an inner join is what we need because every product has a product subcategory. Very important. Cool. Now the next part says, not every subcategory has a parent category. Okay. What this is telling us is that there is a relationship between these two tables, right? However, there are instances where there is, let's say, a product subcategory that does not exist over here, right? That's something that's very, very important. So there are instances where you've got a subcategory that actually does not exist over here, right? So what I'm already thinking is that you've got the product category. So in terms of how you represent your tables, you actually represent them like this. So you'll have the PC, and then here you'll have the PSC. The reason why I'm putting them like this is because this is more of the parent, right? Because the parent should always be on the left. I think that's how maybe, let's say, things would normally work in this thing, right? So the parent would normally be on the left. Then it says not every category should be on this one, right? Cool. So now we have an understanding that here it's either we're going to use the left outer or the right outer. Very important. Now we're going to go back to the question. So it says you need to merge the three queries into one. The solution must ensure best performance. Now, how should you merge the tables? To answer, direct the appropriate and stuff like that. Okay, great. Now, I'm going to go to our options over here, right? Okay, you see, this is the part that's very important. Do you see how they've actually placed the tables over here, right? This is the very, very important part. Because depending on this, because we know that there is something that we find here that is not here. So if there is something that is here that could not be found here, and this was, let's say, the left table, this was the right table, probably going to use the left outer, because the reason why I'll use the left outer is return all the rows from the left table and only retain existing rows on the other table. So that's why I'll use it like that. Now, if we come back over here, let's read this. The answers, the options that we have. So this is the other option that they normally give you when it comes to, I'm just going to turn back my presentation again. So this is the other option that they normally give you when it comes to selecting the correct answer, right? So I think this thing just started from the beginning. Just going to go all the way. Okay, I think it should be here. Okay, there's our diagram. Okay, great. So we are here. So I think I skipped it again. Yeah. So now let's look at our answers, right? I'm going to give you guys a minute to decide what's the correct answer, but I think you guys already have an idea from the diagram that we were actually drawing and the illustrations that we're actually doing, right? Very important. So it says the product is on the left and the product subcategory is on the right. But now they are asking, what is the best way to actually merge these two tables? If we go to our diagram here, we know that every product has a subcategory. So we know that there is matching results between the two tables. And if you've got matching results between the two tables, you want to use an inner join because you know that there's matching results between the two tables, right? So for me, the answer here would be an inner join. I'm not sure if anyone else has a different answer because we know that there's matching results between the two tables. Cool. Now the next table has a bit of a problem because we know that from our rules description there is that not every subcategory table has a parent category, right? So what's very important is to understand that these two tables do not match, right? And what's important is that depending on how they've placed the tables, you could either use a left outer or a right outer. If maybe they place the other table on the right or maybe on the left, so that determines which option you actually choose. Now, if we go back to our table, the product subcategory is on the left. And then on the right, we've got the product category. Very important. Now, the reason why I think the product category would work better if we use the right outer is because when we use the right outer, we are basically saying, right, retain all the results that are here, but any of the subcategories that actually do not exist over here, it's fine. We don't want to see them, right? So only return every result because this is the parent. This is the product category, right? The product category is more like the parent, and then the subcategory is just the child below that one. Because this is on the right, you always want to start from the right going to the left. I see there is people that actually say it, the left outer, right? I understand why you'd say the left outer, right? And maybe I think what's important is to go back over here, right? If you read, it says not every subcategory has a parent, right? So what this tells you is that the parent, or like the most important table over here, is actually the product category, right? So that would probably mean that we will always have to start from the product category because it's actually the parent table. So always start at the parent table if they give you a clue of saying this is the parent table. Now, because you're starting from the parent table, when you're writing a script, you're actually starting from the right and going to the left. If they rearrange, so they could actually rearrange this and put the product category on the left and then switch the other one on that one. So then you'd use the left outer in that case. So always prioritize the parent table. Yes, you always prioritize the parent table. So there's two things that you normally prioritize when you're writing your, let's say your script or writing the select, right? Firstly is the parent table and the dimension table, right? So because those are the tables that normally are not too detailed, so you'd want to start from them. So normally the parent table or the dimension table. So they would give you a clue to say, if they say parent table, you know immediately. With the product table, and this one is very easy because you can already tell that the parent table between these two is the product, because the product is probably at a higher level and then the subcategory just goes below that one. So you can already tell that the parent is actually the product. And over here, you can see that the product category, then the subcategory, then that one would be the child from the parent, which is the category. So that's how you tell between the parent and the child table. But always prioritize the parent table, which is why in this case, you would want to use what? The right outer. This is a very tricky question. Then you might actually find that they might repeat it, but actually switch it the other way around and see if people can actually still see what exactly is the correct answer. Yeah, so always start with the parent. It's actually the best way to actually do this. Right, cool. I think we are done with our first set of questions, so I thought that we could do maybe 6 questions. I think the next thing that I wanted to do, right, something slightly different. I wanted to take you guys through the fundamentals of DEX formulas. So I'm just going to go to here, because I think fundamentals for DEX formulas are very important. Anyone who is scared about DEX formulas, anyone who feels like DEX formulas are very scary. So we will continue with questions tomorrow, don't worry. I covered, let's say, some of the core questions that I think are very important for you guys to be familiar with during the exam. But now, because tomorrow we're also going to be covering some DEX questions, I thought maybe before I even just get into the DEX questions, rather do a bit of a presentation on the DEX formulas and all of that. So this is actually a slide from the 8-week program that we do for Power BI. That's why you see that it's green. It actually represents the branding for the Whittle Academy. I think some of you are at Whittle Academy, so you might be familiar with the colors that we use, right? So I think now we're going to do a bit of a switch, and we are actually going to do, let's say, DEX formulas, right? Yeah, DEX formulas are a bit intimidating. So maybe I'm going to ask that maybe we take a 5-minute break. I think maybe people want to grab water. I also want to grab water, maybe just 5 minutes. So we can be back at 20 past 7. Then we can continue with a mini lesson on DEX formulas. And then we can then finish off tomorrow. Just 5 minutes, guys. Okay, I think we are back. Hopefully, everyone can actually hear me. Uh, okay, I'm back. Okay, so hopefully everyone is now back. So we're going to start a very, let's say, very interesting lesson. And this lesson is around your DEX formulas, right? And I know a lot of people genuinely do not like DEX formulas. I know they can be quite intimidating. And hopefully what I can do during the session is to maybe simplify the whole DEX formula concept and make it easy for everyone to basically understand. So I thought before we just get into the DEX formulas questions, it would be great to maybe just get the foundations to understand what DEX formulas are actually used for, right? And I think that's something that's very important. I'll try to be as demonstrative as much as I can because I feel like that also helps if you're seeing Power BI, and it also really helps you understand what exactly is going on, right? Cool. Okay, cool. So what exactly are DEX formulas? I think that's the first foundation that I think is important. So in essence, DEX formulas stand for data analysis expressions, right? If you've used, let's say, SQL, not SQL, if you've used Excel before, you'd know that DEX formulas are very similar to the Excel formulas. They might have they might have differences there and there, but I think one thing you can give to them is that they are very much similar in terms of how you actually write them. But in essence, DEX formulas are not a programming language. That's something very important to note. It does not qualify as a programming language. It's basically a formula, right? So DEX formulas are basically a formula language that is primarily used for data modeling and data and analysis, right? So within tools like Power BI, you would find DEX formulas being used, pivot table, power pivots. So power pivots are more like an advanced version of that. And then you've got something called analysis services and stuff like that. But the three main use cases for DEX formulas, there are three reasons why you use DEX formulas. And I think this is also very important to understand in the exam. So firstly, you use DEX formulas to create measures, to create calculated columns, and to create calculated tables. So what do I mean by these three, right? Let's start with the first one. So I'm going to move on to Power BI just to illustrate the use cases for this thing. So I'm just going to close. I don't want to save anything here, right? Discard any changes. Discard. So I'm going to do a bit of a demonstration for you guys um, with this data set. Okay, cool. So now remember, the first thing that they say that we use DEX formulas to what? To create measures, to create calculated columns, right? So the first one I'm going to show you guys is the use of DEX formulas to create a calculated column. So when they say DEX formulas are used to create a calculated column, this is what they mean. So you can basically say new column. So if you go to your data here and you say new column, okay, I don't know why it's taking time to respond, but great. So I'm saying new column. The moment I say new column, it's going to create an entire new column. And then the formula that you guys would start to see here is what you call a DEX formula. So this is actually the first use case of a DEX formula. You can use DEX formulas to create calculated columns. Now, if I say calculated column, calculated, oh, I think this is how you spell calculated, right? Equals to, and I say actual, right? So you see the way that it works, you put the column name, Then after putting the column name, you specify the column that you want to do the calculation for. So I've selected the actual gross amount, right? So this is relating to this specific column. And you will see that it normally specifies the table. So it will start with the table and then go to the actual name of the column that you're doing the work for. Now I'm going to add a star and then multiply by 3. So I'm literally creating a new column, and I'm going to save this. And now you guys can see that I've literally created a column that actually did not exist. So this is what they call calculated columns, right? And there was another thing called calculated tables. So you can actually create an entire new table using these DEX formulas. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to tools and I'm going to say new table. So this time I'm not creating a new table. I want to create a calculated, I'm not creating a new column, I'm creating a new table. So I'm going to create a calculated table now. So this is the second use case of DEX formulas. So you can use your DEX formula. I'm going to say table new, let's say 2, right? This is a new table that we're creating. And I'm going to say this table is equals to, so I could say all except, so what all except basically does, you are specifying which columns you want and which ones you want to exclude. I'm going to say all the columns except for, and I need to specify the table, I need to add a comma, and I need to specify I don't want to see the artist, can add another comma, I don't want to see the rank. So whatever that I'm specifying here, I'm saying I do not want to see this. Don't worry guys, I'm just demonstrating how you can actually use DEX formulas, that you can actually create a new table. You can also create a new column using DEX formulas, right? Then I'm going to save this. Right, cool. So you can see that you've just used DEX formulas to create a new column, create a new table. Now the last one that they spoke about was measures, right? So what exactly is a measure? A measure is basically a way for you to summarize data. It does not create, let's say, a new data set, right? If I can use an example, if you go over here, there's something called a measure, right? I'm going to say measure. And let's say I want to calculate the mean. I want to get the minimum, should be equals to mean. So the nice thing about the moment you start writing the formula, you start getting these pop-ups, and they're really good in helping you understand. So if I say if I go to the sales table, and I want to know what is the minimum sale that they actually made. So I'm going to save this. So you will see that we've created a measure over here that is called minimum. Now, if I go to the table here, you guys will see that the minimum actually does not appear because this is a measure. This is not a data set that is actually stored on a Power BI table, but it's just a summarization of the data set, but it's actually kept there. This is something that's very important in the exam, because in the exam, they will actually ask you, which of the 3 do you think takes up a lot of space? Is it a measure? Is it a calculated column? Or is it a calculated table? So it's very important to be able to understand that a measure actually consumes the least amount of storage on a Power BI model, because it is not actually stored, it is just a summary of the data itself. So what I'm going to do here, because we've got the minimum already here, I'm going to take a card and I'm going to put it over there. I'm going to try to minimize it, and I'm going to take the minimum and put it there. So what this tells us that the minimum sale that this artist actually made, so you can see there's different artists, the minimum of the lower sale was actually 150 million, which is actually really good. I think it's really good money. But yeah, so it's actually a way of you actually getting those numbers and all of that. So those are the 3 use cases for DEX formulas, right? Now that we've got that context, let's go back to our presentation. I think there's so many presentations now. I don't know which one is the one. Okay, cool. Okay, so we're back to our presentation, right? So we were speaking about what exactly is a DEX formula. Now we understand that we use it for creating a measure. We use it to create a calculated table, and we also use it to create a calculated column. So those are the different use cases. Very important to keep in mind. Cool. So what do we actually do with these DEX formulas? Like, what is the usage? What is so nice about these DEX formulas that we use them so much? Look, as you guys saw there, you can do a lot of fancy things using DEX formulas, and they're really, really important, right? And I think you can actually find a lot of value in actually using the DEX formulas. So I think that's one thing that I can say is really cool and important with DEX formulas. Please let me know if you can't hear me anymore, because I think my network is just a bit bad at the moment. But hopefully you guys can still see um, yeah, the presentation. But yeah, cool. So maybe I'm just going to turn on the video because I feel like it's actually slowing down my network. Maybe let me turn off video so that maybe we can still continue to stream. Yeah, I've just turned off video. Because my network is unstable. Okay, great. Yeah. So what's important to make note of is that why do we actually use these DEX formulas? Firstly, we use DEX formulas to perform calculations on your data, so it enables business logic inside reports. You know, you can create much more complex and dynamic reports because you are actually using the DEX formulas. So that's something that I think is very important. I'm going to move on to the next one. Right. So what is the difference? Yes, 100%. So I see someone says it seems like measures are basically better than calculated columns and table. 100%. And you know what you just said there? This is something that they might actually ask in the exam. So it's a very, very important statement there. And because they do test this in the exam, they'll ask you, is it a measure? Because I'm not sure if you guys have noticed, in the Power BI exam, they have this tendency of basically saying, minimize effort, minimize this. You know, they love minimizing, let's say, the workload on Power, because as a Power BI professional, you need to build dashboards that are always going to minimize, let's say, the amount of work that's actually required by these dashboards. So always think about which one, based on the situation also, and what they're trying to build. Is very important. So as I've said, DEX formulas are very similar to Excel formulas, right? So the one thing to note is that your Excel formulas and DEX formulas are similar in a sense that they both use your sum, your if, and your count, and they both perform calculations on your data, and the syntax feels very similar. So if you've written, let's say, an SQL, if like an Excel script, an Excel formula function, it's going to be very similar to how you'd also write your DEX ones, right? But there are key differences, right? Excel works at an individual cell. I think that's the limitation. While DEX can work on an entire column and tables, DEX also understands relationship between tables, and DEX also works with a filter context. So a filter, we're going to cover what exactly a filter context is, so do not panic, don't worry. We've got that covered, right? Cool. Now, I got a very small example just below to show you that in Excel, if you were to write a script that, or a formula that is basically summing your results, in Excel it's going to be sum, and you need to specify the columns. But if in DAX, you don't have to specify the range of columns. You just say the total sales is equals to sum sales amount and all of that. That is how basically you do it. Right, so it's a very nice way of actually doing things. Then the next part is DEX is used for creating measures. I think we've already covered this actually. So we use DEX for creating measures for time intelligence, year-to-date formulas, KPIs, and matrices. So I think it's some of the key things that are important to understand as you're working with these DEX formulas, right? And the other thing that I think is also very important to sort of understand is something that is called basic sentence. Right? It's important for you to understand how is DEX actually written. And for the purpose of the exam, I think those are some of the key things that you need to understand. How do you write DEX formulas, and what is the syntax? Because that is what they test you on the exam, right? So firstly, DEX works on columns, not individual cells, very important. And it always references the full column inside the function. It also uses proper relationships in the data model. So if there is no relationship in a data model, it can actually crash or it might actually not work. So that's something that's very important. And in terms of how there, if you look at this one, you've got your total sales. So this would be the name of the table, right? And then this is now your actual calculation, the workings that you're actually doing. So that's where this would actually fall into. And then you've got something that's very important, is that the DEX formulas are also very case sensitive, so very important for you. Coming from knowing Excel, DEX doesn't seem that bad once you understand the syntax. Exactly, it honestly is not that bad. I promise DEX is not as bad as people actually make it. It's very, very similar to Excel. But the one thing that's important is that whenever you use a function, you want to use a parenthesis, right? For example, here, sum is the function, and you need to create a parenthesis, then you've got your column name inside, right? So very important, DEX is not hectic, it's not the bad person that people make it to be. Hectic. So I think people should generally love DEX formulas. I think the more you use them, the better you actually become. But I'm going to give you guys a tip on how you can actually get more comfortable with DEX formulas, right? You don't have to memorize anything, right? One thing I always tell people when it comes to DEX formulas, do not memorize anything. You just need to understand the structure, how it's written, and how to actually read your DEX formula. Right. So now the next part that's really important, they do ask this in the exam, so you can even take a screenshot. Like I would even say take a screenshot on this one because they actually do ask it quite a lot in the exam, right? So it goes back to what we're speaking about, right? If you look at calculated columns versus tables and measures, right? So it's very important to understand how they are stored. So the first aspect is looking at storage. The second aspect is looking at performance. And the other aspect is looking at the purpose, and other ones look at the example, right? So in terms of the calculated column, so the calculated column basically is stored in the Power BI model. So that's why it's actually saying yes. A measure is not stored on Power BI because it's literally a summarization of existing data. So whenever you call a measure, it's just going to summarize the data in real time and get you results. It's not storing anything. So from a storage and performance perspective, it's actually saving you a lot of space, right? Calculated table. Think about it. You are creating an entirely new table that did not exist. So you are actually storing a new table within Power BI, right? Very important. So the next step is performance. The impact of calculated columns can be medium to high, I think, depending on how complex the formula that you're creating, because some of those might have very long formulas. I've written like formulas that are very long or much more complex, and they do take up a lot of performance space on Power BI. So you already know that calculated columns do take a lot of performance. So if there was a question asking you about performance, you already know that measures are probably the best for your performance, right? And calculated columns, I think one thing about calculated columns, they can be slightly less intense than the calculated columns because in some cases you're just extracting data and putting it into a new table than writing heavy syntax or sort of like heavy scripting that requires a lot of performance and all of that. So I think that's why they would rank it as moderate. I think it's something very good to pay attention to. And then let's talk about the purpose, right? I'm sure you guys saw the reason or the purpose behind this when I was doing the demonstration, right? So the purpose really for this calculated columns is to create values per rows. If you're trying to create a new value for each row, you want to use a calculated column. If you're trying to get a summary of a data or a KPI, you want to use a measure. If you're trying to create a new table, you want to use the sort of like the calculated table, right? Believe me, guys, they do ask these things in the exam. Like they will ask you, what is the purpose of a measure? What is the purpose of a calculated column? Or they'll even give you a scenario and ask you which one is the best solution. They might even say, you've got summarized data. Like let's say the company wants to get a summarized view of the data without taking up too much storage. To me, that's already a measure. And if you cannot pick up the difference between a measure, calculated column, they might actually trick you during the exam. So it's very important to understand the use cases and the importance of these three, because they love asking about this one in the exam, and they try as much as they, from the questions that you guys have seen, the questions are very tricky in a sense that they always put keywords in between. So one thing that I would say is, if you prepare for the exam, pay attention to the keywords, as they actually help you to understand what exactly they're trying to ask. Because if you think about it, Power BI is a tool that you use in the corporate setting, right? And in a corporate setting, you need to understand the keywords. What do they want to do? Do they want to increase performance? Do they care about performance? Is it about real time? You know, those business decisions are very important. And that's why in the exam, they try to trick you as much as they can by putting keywords, because if you're going to be someone representing a company and working with these tools, you need to be able to pick up those tiny differences and understand what actually works for the solution that you are actually building. So that's how I would say this is a very, very, very important part to also pay attention to, right? Hopefully that clarifies. These are the three use cases for DEX formulas. Now let's get to the exciting part. We're getting there, right? So there's something that they call aggregate functions. So it's with aggregate functions, as you prepare for your exam, I think it's important for you to know the basic aggregate function, right? Know what is a sum, know what is an average, know what is a count, and just know the differences between these. Because in the exam, they might actually trick you and say, depending on what you want to do you think that the count is the correct one, or the count, or the distinct count, right? Because if you think about the distinct count, only counts unique values. If there's a duplicate, it actually does not count it again, right? The count just counts the records as they are. So depending on what solution you're trying to solve, you might find yourself being asked to select between the count and the count distinct, and you need to understand the difference between those two. So when it comes to testing you in the exam, this is how they basically test. They might actually just give you a clue and ask you select the best between the two. Then you've got average. Average is a very common one. So I think a lot of people generally do not struggle during the exam when it comes to this one. And then you've got sum. So sum is really good for summing results and all of that. So these are all useful for measures and stuff like that. But one thing that I will say is pay attention to the count and count distinct. Or even there's another one called count rows. They love asking about those ones in the exam, just to see if you understand the difference between a count or a count distinct. So that's how they normally ask some of the DEX formula questions, right? Okay, cool. So now moving on to the basic logic. So you need to also understand the difference between an if and the difference between a switch. That's something that's very important for you to understand during the exam, right? So I did add the syntax for those two, right? You don't have to memorize those things. That's one thing I would say. As you prepare for the exam, trust me, you don't have to memorize nothing. You just need to understand the structure and how it's actually written. And in some cases, they want to see if you understand what is the best tool to solve the problem. Now, if you look at the basic logic functions, you've got the switch and you've got the if. I think for this one, I actually think it would be cool if I showed you guys this document. Let me pull the DEX formulas. All right. I'm going to bring this. I'm not sure if I'm even able to put links on here, but let me see if I can put them. Okay, I actually can put links, eh? That's great. So this is something that I think is very important to understand. So the reason why I say you should never memorize DEX formulas is because of this, right? We have a place that has got all these DEX formulas summarized, and it's literally available for you guys to just go through and understand what these DEX formulas are, because this platform actually organizes all of them. So if you go here, so before you write your exam, I highly recommend that you visit this website. Please visit this website before you write your exam. It's very important, right? So you see that they actually list all of the aggregate functions. And if you go to count, what they actually do is that they actually show you how it's actually written and what it's actually used for. And then they can even give you an example of how it's actually used, right? Then you can see there's others, counter, context. For the purpose of your exam, as you're preparing for the exam, you need to understand the difference between all of those, all of this here, because they will ask you, or they will try to trick you and give you counter, context, or context, the other one. So they give you all of these different options, and the purpose for them is to see if you're able to identify which one is best for the case that they're trying to ask you. So that's what they normally do when you do this text formulas question, right? And the other thing that I would say, if we go to the logical functions, so on the logical functions, you see we've got your if, and even with an if statement, they give you more detail, right? They help you understand how it's actually used. So if you look at here, so these are the different ways you can use an if. So an if is useful if you want to say if a product is less than this, assign this. Or if you've got multiple statements, you can actually do this. So two statements, right? Or you can add nested ifs. But one thing that I want you guys to pay attention to is that the if has a limit, right? If you've got too many conditions, you want to use a switch. So in the exam, they might also ask you, in the event that you had multiple situations or multiple conditions, between an if and a switch, which one would you actually use? They might give you a scenario. The switch is really cool in a sense that it allows you to add as many conditions as possible and get answers for those conditions. So the moment you go above two conditions, the if statement might not be the best one to actually use. You would want to just, let's say, switch, move to a switch statement, basically, right? I think it's still loading. I don't know why it's taking this long to load. My network is really bad, sorry guys. So if you look at a switch is really cool in a sense that you can now add multiple conditions, right? So you can say, if the month is 1, then say January. If it's 2, February. 3, March. 4, April. 5, May. 6, June. All the way. Now imagine writing all of this manually. It would actually take you a longer time, right? And I think what is really, really cool about a switch is that it allows you to add as many conditions as you can, and it's really cool, honestly, because sometimes things really get too complex, but it's really important. So one thing I'd say, do not memorize anything, just understand how the syntax is actually written, right? So from here you can see that you say switch, you create brackets, and you say the month, and then you specify these different conditions. That is all that you need to understand as you prepare for these text formulas, but you will see as we get into some of the questions, right? So I thought that's something that's really cool to just pay attention to. So always keep that website very close to you, because I think it's a really cool and amazing website to get your insights from. Cool. Another area that they love asking about in the exam, it's time intelligence, right? So time intelligence really is about using these text formulas to get certain answers at a point in time. So that's the other thing that's really cool about time intelligence. So you've got something called, so these are the ones that I think you guys should pay attention to, right? Because they love asking about this in the exam. So if you at least master those ones that I'm going to be presenting here, you might find yourself in a better position, right? Just understanding what they're used for, right? You don't have to memorize it, understanding. Because you know what they do in the exam? They might actually switch the words. They might actually say which one is the correct one between the total year to date or the same period as last year or the add date. So you need to understand what each of them actually do. And that is the only way that you can actually have a better chance of maybe, let's say, passing the exam, right? So the first one, total year to date or total quarterly or monthly. So this returns your data as of year to date or quarter to date or month to date. So it's great for running totals. If you just want to track how much money as a business you've made like year to date, so for this particular month so far, it's really good for that, right? It's a trading total of your total sales or whatever that you've made as a company. So that's the only instance you might actually use that one. Then the other one is the same period as last year. Same period as last year is very good. Because, for example, if you say, now we are in 2026, how much money did we make at the same period as last year? So same period as last year basically goes back in time around the same period as the current period that you're actually working on. So it's very good. Let's say you're comparing sales for 2016, 2017. You know, it actually shifts your data and checks same period as last time how much you actually made. So you actually see this one quite a lot. Very important to understand. Then you've got add date. So add date, this one actually allows you to shift your date several times. So it's all these features and functions that you can actually add to your disposals, right? That's what the text formulas are all about. It's about the different things you can do to your data using these different formulas and stuff like that. And the one thing that I'll say I noted is important as you prepare for the exam is understanding which one does what, and that's how you're able to pass the exam. Because you will never write a text formula from scratch in the exam. They don't do that, right? But what they do, they can give you bits and pieces of a text formula, and you need to complete it and explain to say, this is the part that's missing, or this is actually the solution, right? So time intelligence, please guys, pay attention to them. Read about time intelligence, understand what they actually use for, because this one is a topic that they also love quite a lot in the exam, right? So previous year or previous quarter, they love asking about this one. Next year, next quarter, parallel period, you know, just familiarize yourself with all these different text formulas and stuff like that. Cool. Hopefully that adds a bit more value. So we're almost done with the text formula introduction, right? This is just an introduction to text formulas. Don't worry, guys. It's not like a full-on blown course on text formulas. So I've got an example script or an example formula here, and what I'm going to do is to help you guys understand how to read these formulas better, right? Because I think this is something that's really important in the exam, right? So you might see something like this, and filter, they love using filter a lot. So the more you see it in a script or example, the more you might better understand this text formula. So I'm going to explain the structure here. So if you look at this text formula, what they're trying to do here, they are trying to determine, this company is trying to determine which sales are high value for them and how much money did they actually make from sales that were high value. So you guys can see that firstly, they define the column. So this is the column name, high value. Then you say equal. Then you say calculate. If you want to do any filtering or anything or any advanced calculation or let's say formula, you need to use the calculate function because it allows you to do any advanced calculations in sum or anything like that, right? So if you look at this, they put the calculate, and whenever the calculate actually starts, you need to create open and close brackets. And then the name of the column should always be in this type of brackets. Very important to pay attention to that. The name of the column would normally be in this type of brackets, right? Total sales, then you've got it over here. And then the filter, what does the filter do? So you create a comma V, then you put the filter. So the filter says, go to the sales table and select the amount column and look for any sale that is greater than 1,000. So the calculation will only include sales that are greater than a so that's what the filter actually does. It filters out anything that does not meet this condition and only sums everything that actually meets that particular condition. So that is what the filter is actually used to do. Something that's really, really cool or important to maybe understand. Like this would be the structure of how they normally do it. After calculate, you put the column name. You can apply a filter if you want to, but you always need to specify it in that manner. Column, table, and the condition, right? Let's do a much more advanced script, right? So I'm going to help you guys read this one. I think it's another one that's also important to understand how to read. Now, they love asking about this one in the exam, and I think I'm going to do my best to illustrate how this is actually done. Now, I'm going to switch to the drawing, right? I think the drawing is very useful when it comes to this. I'm going to switch to draw. I know my drawing is not the best, but I try my best. Okay, cool. I think it went back. Oh my word. And slide. I think my presentation just went back. Okay, cool. So I'm actually going to switch to presentation to the drawing, right? Cool. So I'm going to try to explain to you guys how to read, let's say, this script, right? Cool. So there is something that they call variables, right? So in some cases, they might actually use variables as they basically write this text formulas, right? And I'm going to explain what a variable actually is. If you look at this, right, so they've got something called revenue year on year, right? So what this revenue year on year basically is basically saying by how much did we actually grow our money? I'm going to give an example, right? In 2025, we made 10 rand. This is how much we made in 2025, right? And then in 2026, we made 20 rand, right? This is what we made in 2026. Great. So now, if I asked you, by how much did we grow our business, right? It's a question. By how much did we actually grow our business, right? That's something that's very important to understand. How much did we grow our business? If I were to calculate how much we grow our business, this is what I would do. I would then say 2026 minus 2025 is equals to 10. So this is our growth. So we grew our business by 10 rand, right? But what percentage growth is this? You would say 10 divided by 10. So this 10 is actually for 2025 because we made 10 rand in 2025, but we grew by 10 rand, and we're going to multiply this by 100. Then this would give us basically 100%. So we basically grew this business by 100%. That is exactly what this actually means, right? And this script over here is trying to replicate the very same thing. So on the script, they are literally trying to do what we have just done here to understand by how much the company actually grew. So you can do the same thing using text formulas, but there are stages for you to do that. So this is how they actually do it. So firstly, you say revenue is equals to var. So what this actually means, it's a variable. So variables are a way for you to store, let's say, certain amounts onto certain columns. For example, if I say A is equals to 10 and B is equals to 50, I think this is more for the people maybe that do not yeah, I see some people are leaving. Okay, cool. So yeah, so if you look at this, so you've got 10, you've got 50, right? Great. So what this actually does, it means that whenever I see 50, I know that I'm seeing, whenever I see B, I'm actually seeing 50. And whenever I see A, I'm actually seeing 10. Right, so it's very important. So this is actually a way of assigning variables. So it's assigning numbers to certain letters. So that's the same concept that they're bringing in here. So what they're doing here, they're basically saying that the revenue last year, right? Revenue last year is equals to calculate. They're calculating the revenue using same period as last year. Now I'm going to go back here. What does same period as last year do? Same period as last year actually tells you how much money you made at the same period as last year. So in our case, if 2016 is where we are now, if I use same period as last year, I'm actually reversing to 2015, and that would mean that the revenue that I'm getting here is actually the 10 and not the 20. So by default, revenue pre last year is now equals to 10, right? Happy with that? Then we move on to the next one. Then return, what return actually does, it's basically saying display, right? Return is basically the same as display. Okay, oh, my display is not looking good. So return is basically the same as display. It's saying display these results. So what's going to happen is that you're going to say retain this. So you're retaining the division of this divided by this. Now, if you look at this, the revenue would be 2026, right? Because this is the revenue that we actually have. Yes, calculate actually operates on a filter context. That's a very good one. It's a very good one. So you can see that revenue actually is 2026, and then same period as last year, this would be your 2025. The reason why we're able to use this without specifying is because over here we already did allocate what? That this should be, this is actually equals to the revenue same period as last year. So you can see that this is why this is actually going to be 2025 numbers. So in essence, this is 20 and this is 10. When you subtract these two, you must divide the results by this. Same revenue as last year. Now, do you guys see that what these guys are trying to do here is the same thing that we did here? Because here, they're taking the 20 Rand, subtracting it with the 10 Rand and getting the difference. And they're dividing the difference by this, which is the same as dividing it by 10. So something as simple as that could be a little bit more complex by using your DEX formulas. So what's important is to understand how to read these DEX formulas, because this division actually means that the first row is what you are getting a difference of, and then the second row is what you divide by. So in essence, whatever that is here is what should be at the top, right? So this should be the 10 Rand difference. Then whatever that is now here should be what should be at the bottom, and this is what you basically use for actually doing the division. So that's how basically you would use a DEX formulas for actually doing this. This is more of an introduction, honestly, on how DEX formulas are used. I know it's now 8 o'clock. I'm sure that people have plans and all of that. So we will continue tomorrow. Sorry for the network issues and stuff like that, but hopefully that tomorrow we will not be having any sort of network issues like we actually had today. So yeah, I think this is it for day one of our Power BI exam prep. I will see you guys tomorrow.